Big Shaq stepped into his own fried chicken joint for a quick bite, but froze mid-order when a whisper behind the counter dropped a $1 million bomb. He don't even know. We're about to walk out with $1 million in his face. What started as lunch turned into a war for legacy, as a ghost from Big Shaq's past used his mother's name to launder dirty money through his own kitchen. Now the legend's not just serving chicken. He's serving justice, because when you come for Big Shaq's soul, you better not miss. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal never needed the money. That part was true. He'd earned enough in sneakers, dunks and TV deals to retire 10 times over. But money, he'd learned, couldn't buy him what mattered most: respect without fear, love without leverage, and community without a price tag. That's why on a sunlit Wednesday morning in Monroe, Georgia, the 7'1" man, known as Big Shaq, stood behind the counter of his own fried chicken joint, wearing a red apron that said, "Still served." His laugh rolled like thunder through Shaq's soul fry, the smell of honey-glazed thighs and butter-soaked cornbread filling the place like a Sunday church kitchen. He handed out extra wings to the kids, who couldn't afford sides, slipped apple pies into the hands of quiet grandmothers, and offered more than food. He offered presents. Big Shaq wasn't just a celebrity around here. He was a symbol that you could have everything and still choose to stand with the people. On that morning, he was kneeling down to tie a kid's sneaker. Yes, tie it himself. When an older man leaned across the counter. "Shaq, man," the guy chuckled. "You too rich to be doing all this." Shaq just grinned, the corner of his lip tilting. "Ain't nobody too rich to care." He rose slowly, knees cracking, shoulders as wide as a pickup. The staff behind him worked with the ease of familiarity. Most were local hires, hand-picked. Shaq believed in giving second chances. Former inmates, single moms, dropout teens. This kitchen had more comeback stories than a locker room. But that morning felt off. It started small. Trey, the new fry guy, was late. Shaq didn't remember approving his hiring. Maybe corporate slid him through. Then there was the delivery van, 2 hours early and with a different driver than usual. Shaq asked where Mickey, the regular, had gone. The driver mumbled something about routes changing, and didn't meet Shaq's eye. Still, Shaq brushed it off. He'd dealt with worse snake agents, fake friends, crooked investors. He wasn't about to get suspicious over a late fryer and a quiet driver. He headed toward the back kitchen for a drink of water. As he turned the corner near the break room, his ears picked up something strange. Low voices, the kind that didn't belong in his house. "The store is good for another 2 weeks. Tops. Then we're done." Pause. "Yeah, once it clears, we're out. A mil clean." Not a single eye blinked. Shaq stopped. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just a second's hesitation, body half-turned, his hand still on the cooler door. "$1 million? His jaw clenched, but he didn't push the door open. "Not yet. He don't suspect nothing. Big ol' gentle giant. Thinks this place runs on goodwill." The words hit harder than a shove. Shaq had been called names his whole life. Gentle. Goofy. Too trusting. Too slow. They never said it when he was winning titles. But behind closed doors, he knew the tones. The soft disrespect hidden behind praise. He eased back quietly, not saying a word, his mind racing. He didn't know who was speaking. He didn't know if it was Trey, or the delivery driver, or someone else entirely. But one thing was clear. Someone inside his own business was planning to walk away with something they didn't earn. He made it back to the front, shaking hands and smiling like nothing had changed. But inside, something had split, like a crack running under the floor. No one else noticed it yet. The cashier laughed at a customer's joke. The line moved smoothly, but Shaq did. He sat at his usual corner booth, watching. Not paranoid, just aware. There were 3 new faces that week. Trey, the fry guy. Kellen, a tall, fast-talking cashier. And Delroy, a backdoor stockman, who didn't say much. Shaq ran names in his head. Didn't remember signing off on any of them. He leaned back, took a sip of sweet tea, and listened. Sometimes it wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't say. The quick glances, the hushed tones, the perfectly rehearsed small talk. Shaq's thoughts drifted to his mother, Lucille, who'd once told him, "If you ever feel like the room changed but nobody moved, trust that feeling, baby." He trusted it now. Later that day, he visited the storage closet, said he was checking expiration labels. Instead, he checked the camera angles. Two were misaligned. One wasn't recording at all. That wasn't an accident. Shaq felt it, a tension growing underneath the routine, like someone had pulled the thread of a sweater and was still tugging, waiting for it to unravel all at once. He walked back to the front counter, offered a wide smile to a teenage girl paying in coins. "It's on me today," he said, waving off the payment. She beamed. "For real?" "Always," Shaq said. "Just do something kind for the next person." The day moved on like it always did. Kids laughed, seniors waved, grease popped in the back. But now, Shaq was watching. Not with anger, but with a purpose. Someone was moving pieces in his house, using his legacy, his trust, his people, and whatever they were planning, he intended to stop it before it cost him everything. As the sun dipped toward the pine-lined horizon, Shaq locked up the restaurant himself. The air was warm, cicadas humming low. But inside, that whisper clung to him like steam from the fryer. "They don't even know we're about to walk out with $1 million in their face." Shaq stood under the store's glowing red sign, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Y'all picked the wrong kitchen," he muttered to the silence. Tomorrow he wouldn't just be serving fried chicken. He'd be hunting ghosts. The sun cut sharp lines through the wide glass windows of Shaq's Soul Fry that morning. The flagship store stood proud on Peachtree Avenue, 2 blocks from the high school Shaq had donated gym equipment to, and 5 minutes from the church his mama still called home. Inside, the restaurant buzzed like it always did. Clatter of trays, smells of spice and grease, laughter under gospel-tinged blues humming from the ceiling speakers. For anyone else, it looked like just another good day. Shaq stepped through the back entrance around 10:32 a.m., dressed in a black hoodie, camo joggers, and size 22 sneakers that left thunder behind each step. He wasn't here to impress. This was his sanctuary. He headed toward the side of the counter, nodded to Carla at the register, and slapped palms with Nate, the head cook, who always had a joke ready. Today Shaq beat him to it.
"Don't burn the biscuits again, man. I still haven't forgiven you for last Sunday."
Nate held a hand to his heart. "Swear on my mama's cornbread, boss. Redemption Day." Shaq chuckled, tapping the bell on the counter. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the deep fryers. He grabbed his order slip and made his way toward the kitchen side prep area to get his usual 2-piece thigh combo, honey glaze, with a side of Cajun green beans and extra cornbread. He didn't need to eat it every day, but he liked knowing it still tasted like the first time he made the recipe stick. As he rounded the corner near the walk-in freezer, a sound made him pause. Not loud, not clear, but definitely not right. Voices. Low, close, words tucked behind steam, and fan noise. He stopped beside a shelf of lemon pepper seasoning, half shielded by boxes of takeout trays. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but sometimes the air shifts in a place you know like your own heartbeat. They don't even know we're about to walk out with $1 million in their face. The words came sharp, cool, confident. Another voice replied, chuckling, softer, cocky. "Man, he's too soft. All heart. He'll never see it coming." Shaq's hand tightened around the edge of the metal rack. His heart didn't race. It sank, like it knew something it hadn't wanted to admit. He didn't recognize either voice, but the tone wasn't foreign. That same dismissive flavor, the kind he'd heard in boardrooms, where they smiled while slicing your name out of the profit sheet. He shifted his weight back silently, mind already reeling. Was this about him, his money, or was someone using his name to wash dirtier cash through his walls? Shaq didn't barge in. He didn't demand names. That wasn't his style. Not anymore. He'd learned from years in the spotlight that reacting fast usually got you blindsided. He stepped out like nothing had happened, picked up his tray from the warmer, and walked to his usual booth by the front window, smiled, nodded at customers, cracked a joke with the delivery guy at the door. But his mind, locked on the whispers, he scanned the restaurant. Who had been in the back just then? Trey? Delroy? Maybe Kellen. All three were new enough that he hadn't memorized their rhythms yet. The kitchen felt the same, but something about their presence scratched at the walls of his instincts. He glanced at the register camera above the counter, still blinking red. Recording. He'd check that later. As he took the first bite of his honey-glazed thigh, the taste was perfect. Crispy, savory, a kiss of sweetness. But he chewed slower. The food hadn't changed. The room had. He caught sight of Kellen carrying a stack of boxes to the stockroom. No rush. Too casual. Delroy came out moments later, wiping his hands on a towel, nodding to someone at the grill. They didn't seem nervous, but neither did thieves in the early stage of a long con. Shaq thought back to his early days, in the league. Agents, handlers, brandmen, all smiles until the ink dried. Some smiled even when they stole. He remembered his financial advisor, in '02, who tried to slip through an off-the-books endorsement deal with a fake charity. Shaq shut that down fast. But this felt different. Closer, dirtier. Not someone trying to skim off the top. Someone trying to rip the soul from the business. He stood, dumped his tray, and walked to the storage office in the back. Pulled the door shut, sat down, opened the employee log. The most recent hires were processed 2 weeks ago. HR paperwork all checked out, but it felt too clean. All listed with background checks, standard contracts, nothing off on paper, but people like that, the slick kind, they knew how to slide through. He rubbed his temples. His face, once the face of dominance on the court, now showed the lines of a man who built something real, and feared watching it rot from the inside. His phone buzzed. A message from Lucille. Made gumbo today. You coming for dinner, baby? Shaq stared at it for a second, smiled, replied, always, save me the drum. He sat there another moment, staring at the monitor above the desk. The camera feeds rolled silently. He rewound to 15 minutes ago. No sound on these feeds, but the video was enough. 2 men by the freezer, facing away. He couldn't see faces, but the timing lined up. Voices, words, one leaning against the wall like he owned it. The other checking something on his phone. Shaq stared long and hard. He didn't know the full play yet. Didn't know who was orchestrating what. But he knew the game had started. And like always, he planned to finish it on his feet, not on his back. He locked the office, walked out to the dining area, and nodded to Carla again. Carla, he said, his voice steady. You ever hear someone say something in here that didn't sit right? She looked up. You mean today? He paused. In general. She tilted her head. Cautious. Sometimes. But people talk. What kinda not sitting right you mean? Shaq smiled just enough to deflect. Never mind. Just keeping ears open. He stepped back outside into the sunlight. The day still looked normal. The cars still passed. Kids still played across the street. But to Shaq, the entire block had shifted an inch to the left. He looked up at the red and yellow sign that read Shaq's Soul Fry, shining bright like it always did. He whispered to himself, low, calm, like a promise he meant to keep. They think I ain't watching. That's their first mistake. Shaq had always believed in instincts. The kind that don't shout. They whisper. That whisper had turned into a hum, since he heard the voices behind the kitchen door. He didn't confront anyone. Not yet. He knew better. A man in his position couldn't afford to jump at shadows. Not when shadows often came dressed in smile. Over the next few days, Shaq watched. Not with suspicion painted across his face, but with the calm, deliberate patience of someone who'd been burned before. The 3 new hires moved through the restaurant like they'd been born behind a fryer. Efficient, polite, professional. That was the problem. They were too clean. Trey, tall with tight twists and a charming grin, worked the fryer like a magician. Too good, too smooth. Kellen, the front register guy, kept his shirt crisp, his tones slick, and never once looked rattled, not even during a lunch rush. And Delroy, backstock and dish shift, moved with military precision and an unnatural silence that made Shaq's gut itch. He reviewed the hiring records again. All 3 had resumes, verified identities, and no criminal backgrounds. But Shaq didn't care what the paper said. Paper could lie. Motions could be rehearsed. Intent, though, that always leaked through the cracks. He started connecting dots. Trey always volunteered to take inventory on Fridays. Kellen handled deliveries with unusual assertiveness for a new guy. Delroy never interacted with vendors, but he was always near the storage room when drop-offs happened. Shaq remembered his old teammate Rashid used to say, the quiet ones either got wisdom or secrets. You gotta find out which. Delroy wasn't wise. Shaq began pulling supply invoices, after hours, cross-checking them with delivery manifests and expense reports. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Orders were placed for items that never made it onto shelves. Cases of fryer oil that didn't exist. Boxes of ribs, bulk spice purchases doubled without reason. Everything technically passed through the books, but the trail was slippery. He ran calculations. Over 3 weeks there were discrepancies amounting to nearly $72,000. Enough to hurt, but not enough to trigger an immediate audit. That was smart. Shaq respected smart. But this was surgical. He flipped through old security footage. Some clips skipped, others lagged. The timestamps on the backdoor camera didn't align with the rest. Someone had tampered with the system. Shaq leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the screen. "I've seen gold diggers, fakers, and suits with snake smiles," he murmured to himself. But these boys, they were ghosts in aprons. He thought of how they'd positioned themselves in the store. Trey had taken to joking with the staff quickly, charming the crew, cracking jokes with customers. Kellen was the kind who made people feel listened to. He played the part of a small-town southern guy, with a handshake firm enough to be remembered, but soft enough not to raise alarms. And Delroy? He was the shadow, the cleanup man, always in the background, never taking initiative, but somehow always in the right place when supplies were missing or cameras failed. Shaq opened a drawer in his office and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. He'd kept it since he opened the first soul fry. Inside were handwritten notes, vendor contacts, security codes, employee birthdays. He started a fresh page titled Ghost Crew and began writing everything down, not just what he saw, but what felt off. One detail jumped out. Kellen always asked for the closing shift, even when it wasn't his rotation. And the receipts for late-night deliveries, often signed off with a name Shaq didn't recognize. Quinn. He'd never hired a Quinn. That night, after locking up, Shaq returned to the supply room with a flashlight and a small GoPro he'd used once for a charity event. He mounted it discreetly behind the dry goods rack, aimed toward the back door. It wouldn't stream to the system, just a standalone memory card. No one would know it was there. The next morning, Shaq acted like nothing changed. Greeted the team with his usual charisma, laughed with Carla, even complimented Delroy's stacked crates. But now his movements were deliberate, strategic. He began asking innocent questions. "Y'all see the rib delivery yesterday? Or anyone notice the new honey batch tastes off?" He was careful to ask them out loud, in front of each other, so responses could be cross-checked. Trey claimed the ribs were late. Kellen said they were signed in. Delroy stayed silent. That afternoon, Shaq visited the local supply distributor, not with lawyers, just a clipboard and his reputation. Inside the warehouse, the manager greeted him like an old friend. "Shaq, what brings you in, brother?" Shaq smiled. "Just making sure my money's still working for me. Got any record of a Quinn R signing for deliveries to my Peachtree location?" The manager frowned, pulled up records, and shook his head. "Ain't no Quinn on our payroll. But you've had 3 sign-offs in that name this month, all for bulk oil and chicken powder." Shaq's nod was slow, deliberate. He thanked the man, walked out, and sat in his Escalade for 5 minutes without starting the engine. He'd built this place from the ground up, not just with capital but with trust, and someone had walked into his kitchen, smiled in his face, and decided to pull the rug right under his shoes. It wasn't just theft, it was disrespect, the kind that pretends you're too big to notice, too kind to fight back, too distracted to care. But Shaq wasn't distracted, not anymore. That night he reviewed the hidden camera footage. At 2:12 a.m., someone entered the store through the back. The timestamp rolled. A figure moved fast, deliberate, key in the lock, gloves on, hoodie pulled low. The figure pulled boxes off the rack, moved them into a waiting vehicle, then locked the door behind him. Shaq paused the frame. The walk, the posture, the way he held the box. Delroy. No doubt. Shaq leaned back, hands steepled under his chin. His next move wouldn't be loud or reckless. It would be precise. Because now he didn't just suspect something. He knew. And knowledge. That was power. They thought they'd buried their scheme under grease and gravy. But Big Shaq was wide awake now, and he had a ledger of ghosts to confront. Shaq stood in the break room, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, his eyes fixed on a scuffed floor tile. He'd watched that hidden camera footage at least 5 times since last night. Delroy, hoodie pulled low, hands steady, back door wide open, sliding stolen goods into the night, like it was just another Tuesday. But now in the late hours after closing, standing alone with a mop bucket and the smell of lemon cleaner in the air, Shaq wasn't so sure about anything. She was humming softly when he noticed her. Lenora, slender frame, thick curls tucked into a loose wrap, gloves on, pushing a mop across the back hallway floor with practiced rhythm. She didn't see him at first. She was lost in it. Her song, her task, her own space in the quiet hours. Shaq didn't interrupt. He watched for a beat longer than necessary before clearing his throat. Lenora glanced up, startled, then smiled. "Oh, hey, Mr. O'Neill. Didn't hear you come in." "You can call me Shaq," he said, stepping out of the shadows. "Didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't." Her voice was easy, not nervous. "I'm just in my head this time of night." Shaq leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying her. She had the look of someone who'd been tired for a long time and learned how to wear it. Young, early 30s maybe. But there was an old wisdom in her eyes. "You always clean this late?" he asked. "Best time to get it done without people in the way," she said. "And my son's asleep by now. Works out." "Your boy how old?" "6. Name's Avery. Wants to be a scientist. Told me last week he's gonna invent a machine that makes dinner while I nap." She chuckled to herself, pride tucked just behind the fatigue. Shaq nodded. "Sounds like a genius in the making." There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. "I heard you hired in last month," he said finally. Lenora glanced over.
"Yeah, Delroy helped get me on."
"Said y'all needed someone to keep things clean at night. Said he'd vouch for me." Shaq's stomach shifted. It was the first time he'd heard Delroy's name used that way, with kindness, loyalty, like he wasn't just a part of the crew, but someone out here doing good. "Delroy," Shaq echoed slowly. "You know him well?" "Not really. But he came through when I needed it." She paused, set the mop against the wall, and peeled off one glove. "People don't usually look out for women like me. Not without wanting something." He didn't. He just saw I was struggling. And he said ain't no shame in workin' hard, just in lettin' good folks drown. Shaq didn't say anything. His jaw tightened a fraction. "You ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself?" she asked. "Yeah," Shaq said quietly. "My mama." Lenora smiled. "Then you know what it means." He looked at her for a long moment. Not just at her words, at her posture, her sincerity, the unshakable way she stood by Delroy. It got under his skin in a way he couldn't name. The footage didn't lie, but this woman, this mother wasn't lying either. So what was the truth? On the walk back to his office, Shaq's thoughts tangled. Was he too quick to judge? Had his years of being targeted made him suspicious of anyone who moved different? Maybe Delroy had a reason. Maybe someone else was pulling the strings. Shaq knew from his NBA days how quickly people turned you into a narrative, either hero or villain without ever knowing the details. He thought about those contracts early in his career, the ones with tricky language, the times he'd sit in boardrooms surrounded by white men in suits, all nodding, all friendly, while slipping in clauses that cut his value. He remembered the endorsements that painted him as the comic relief, the big goofy guy, never the strategist, never the leader, the backhanded praise from anchors who called him well-spoken, like it was a surprise. Quiet racism was like mildew. You didn't always see it, but you felt the rot. Now here he was, wondering if he'd inherited some of that suspicion, if he was applying it to men who looked like him. Poor men. Men trying to get by. Delroy didn't have money. Lenora sure didn't. Maybe what Shaq saw as theft was something more complicated. Survival wearing a mask. He opened his laptop, flipped through the security logs, and paused. One line item stood out. A purchase order filed under his own authorization code for 2 pallets of fryer oil, dated 3 days ago. He never signed that, but the code was correct. So who had it? The number used wasn't Delroy's. It wasn't Kellen's either. The last 4 digits traced back to a locked digital access code, one that only a few high-level employees could even use. It was registered under an administrative name. Q. Red. That name again. Shaq's stomach dropped. He hadn't heard from Quentin Red in over a decade. Used to be his agent. Smart. Slick. Too slick. Got banned after tax evasion charges. He disappeared after that. No contact. No sightings. Now his name was showing up inside Shaq's system. Shaq leaned back slowly in his chair. Everything shifted again. Maybe Delroy wasn't the ringleader. Maybe he was the mule, the one doing the dirty work without knowing the whole game. Maybe Lenora was right to trust him. But even if Delroy wasn't orchestrating it, he was in it. That couldn't be ignored. Shaq looked up at the wall. A photo of his mother handing him his high school diploma. Her smile held no judgment, just belief. This wasn't about just catching a thief anymore. It was about understanding the shape of the trap before walking into it blind. Lenora's words echoed in his ears. People don't usually look out for women like me. He thought of Avery. 6 years old. Wanting to be a scientist. Waking up in the morning to find his mother gone. Working late to clean a place that might be falling apart from the inside. Shaq exhaled slowly. He couldn't let his heart cloud the truth. But he also couldn't let the truth flatten people who didn't deserve it. He opened a new tab. Began searching quietly for traces of Quentin Red. And in the corner of his mind, one thought pressed harder than the rest. What if Delroy wasn't betraying him, but being used just like he had been? The silence in Shaq's soul fry, after hours, wasn't peaceful. It was thick, still, like the walls were holding their breath. Shaq stood just inside the back door, keys in hand, the usual jingle replaced by a single dull click. As he locked it behind him, every step echoed louder than it should have, bouncing off stainless steel and tile like whispers in an empty chapel. He wasn't here to cook. He wasn't here to check fryer temperatures or review payroll. He was here because the building he built felt like it didn't belong to him anymore. The office light stayed off. He didn't need it. He moved by memory, tracing the edge of the desk with a hand the size of a dinner plate, reaching under the keyboard tray for the hidden latch he'd installed years ago. The panel popped open with a gentle snick, revealing the backup drive and ledger case he rarely touched. It was all supposed to be clean, organized, simple. But nothing felt simple now. Shaq slid the sleek black ledger from its holster and placed it on the desk like it was sacred. It was digital, locked behind a biometric scan, and a backup password only he and his regional manager were supposed to know, except his manager had quit 3 months ago. Suddenly, claiming family health issues. Shaq remembered thinking it felt abrupt, but grief didn't follow logic. The scanner lit green. He entered the passcode. What loaded on screen wasn't routine numbers, not vendor receipts, not tax filings. What stared back at him were LLCs, a list of names that didn't match anything in his network, each with its own checking account, wire transfers, and a pattern that spiked hard in the last 5 months. He scrolled, fingers slowing as the totals added up in real time. Signing nearly 1 million. Most wired out to 3 shell companies registered in Nevada, Delaware, and the Cayman Islands, all within the last 90 days. Quiet, clean, methodical. Someone had gone through his accounts, like a surgeon, not to steal at once, but to drain slowly, intelligently. But the line that knocked the breath out of him sat at the very bottom. Final beneficiary, Lucille Holdings Inc. Shaq leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the name. Lucille, his mama. Not the LLC, the woman. Lucille O'Neill, the woman who raised him in a 1-bedroom apartment, who stretched a bag of rice and canned beans into 3 days of meals, who called him baby, even after he turned pro, who never asked for money, but always asked if he was happy. She had no stake in Soulfry. Never had. She was his soul, not his partner. So who would take that name? Who would sign her into something this dirty? Shaq felt something in his chest pull tight. Not anger, not even fear, something more personal, more invasive. Someone wasn't just robbing him. They were weaponizing his past, his love, his loyalty, and that made this bigger than fraud. It made it personal. He clicked deeper into the document metadata. IP traces, upload locations, access logs. Whoever had set this up had tried to wipe the tracks, but not perfectly. One access point pinged from an address in Atlanta, another through a masked VPN. But Shaq recognized the pattern. He'd seen this kind of setup before years ago. Not from his own accountant, but from Quentin Red, a name that should have stayed buried. Quentin had been his agent during his early NBA years. Brilliant, fast-talking, ruthless. The kind of man who smiled while he calculated. Quentin could turn 1 million into 5 if you didn't ask how. Shaq had dropped him the second his hands got caught in some offshore scandal. But by then Quentin had already started unraveling careers, fines, sanctions, a quiet ban from the league's inner business circles. Shaq hadn't heard his name since, until now. Lucille Holdings. He stared at the screen, like it was daring him to believe it. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't just some anonymous hustle. This was a setup built with knowledge only someone close would know. Quentin knew Lucille wasn't on any official paperwork, but he also knew what that name meant. To Shaq, what it would do to him emotionally if it showed up on a report or in a courtroom. It was an attack from the inside, but carried out through proxies. Shaq leaned forward, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began scribbling connections, names, dates, shifts worked, accounts signed. It was all fitting now. The three new hires, Trey, Kellen, Delroy, they weren't the architects. They were the tools, just pieces placed with precision, allowed enough freedom to feel empowered but kept in the dark about the real design. A screen flashed in the corner. A security ping. Shaq clicked it open. It was the GoPro footage he'd set up in the dry storage. Another night, another recording. He watched Delroy again. This time, though, something changed. Delroy didn't take anything. He stood there, phone in hand, face lit by the screen, looking nervous. Then he whispered into the phone. "I don't know, man. This don't feel right anymore." Shaq paused the feed. So Delroy had doubts. Maybe even regrets. That mattered. He sat back, hand on his chin. This wasn't about catching one thief anymore. It was about understanding a machine of manipulation. One designed by someone who knew Shaq's habits, his heart, his blind spots. The name Lucille wasn't just forgery. It was emotional warfare. He saved the files, encrypted them, and slid the drive back into the hidden slot. He wasn't going to the police. Not yet. That was what they'd expect. A man with his stature, his money, blow it all up, go loud, take it public. But Shaq knew better. Quentin wasn't afraid of noise. He was afraid of clarity. So Shaq was going to take this slow, calculated. One piece at a time. He stood from the desk, towering in the low light, a silhouette that once terrified NBA centers but now burned with a different fire. This was no longer about stolen money. It was about reclaiming his name, his house and his mother's legacy. The ghosts had made their move. Now it was Shaq's turn. The sun was high over Monroe Park, pouring gold across rows of folding tables, lined with crates of canned goods, fresh produce, and bags of chicken Shaq had personally paid for. It was his annual Soul and Serve Day, a tradition where his restaurant gave out meals, groceries and back-to-school kits for families in need. There were bounce houses for the kids, gospel music humming from loudspeakers, and enough smiles to make a man forget the weight pressing against his chest. Shaq stood near a stack of boxes under a canvas tent, stamped with the Soulfry logo. He wore his red apron, sun-bleached jeans, and a cap pulled low. He towered over the volunteers, but today he didn't feel larger than life. He felt under it. For the first hour, everything moved smooth. Kids ran wild. Parents hugged him like he was an uncle. Local news crews filmed B-roll for the evening report, and the mayor dropped by for a photo op he hadn't earned. But Shaq wasn't focused on the cameras. He was watching Trey. Trey stood near the bottled water station, cracking jokes, dapping people up, flashing that signature smile like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't been on the floor the same night those ghost LLCs siphoned thousands through Shaq's kitchen. Like he wasn't part of a quiet scheme bleeding his business from the inside out. Shaq approached him casual, slow, handing out oranges to the line of kids before stepping beside him. "You holding up all right?" Shaq asked, tone friendly but lined with an edge. Trey didn't flinch. "You know me, boss. Ain't nothing to it." Shaq nodded, handing out a few more snacks before leaning in, voice low enough not to travel. "You ever hear the name Quentin Red?" he asked, eyes fixed on the crowd. Trey stiffened. Not visibly. Just enough. "Nah," he said after a pause too short to be honest. "Why?" Shaq smiled politely to a mother with two toddlers, then leaned a little closer. "Because his ghost's been showing up in my books. And funny thing, right after y'all joined my crew, money started vanishing." Trey's eyes narrowed a fraction. His body didn't move, but his tone lost the ease. "You accusing me of something?" Shaq didn't blink. "I'm asking you to think real hard about who you're protecting, because this ain't about just me. It's about the folks you're feeding lies while they wait on their groceries." Trey took a step back, raised his voice just enough. "You calling me a thief in front of all these people, Shaq? That what this is?" Heads turned, eyes shifted. A volunteer stopped mid-stack. Shaq didn't answer. He wasn't going to spar in front of cameras. But the damage was done. Trey held his arms out, loud and theatrical now. "Man, I come here to help. I'm trying to give back to folks like me. And this millionaire think he can treat us like suspects." Someone in the crowd mumbled, "Damn, for real?" And just like that, the ground tilted. By the end of the event, whispers outpaced the music. Not everyone believed Trey, but enough wanted to believe someone like him more than someone like Shaq, who wore money in his walk, who they loved but didn't quite know anymore. It only took one moment for resentment to find traction. By the time Shaq made it back to the restaurant that night, his phone buzzed with a message from Carla. You see what they posting? He opened his socials. The first post came from a local blog site. Big Shaq's big ego. Soul Fry employees say owner accused them without proof. Another read, too rich to care? Shaquille O'Neal's restaurant rocked by allegations of mistrust and mismanagement. Screenshots circulated. A blurry video clip someone had recorded of the park confrontation. No context. Just Trey's voice rising. Shaq standing silent. No explanation. No truth, just perception. He scrolled through comments. Some defended him, called it nonsense. But others? Another rich man losing touch. Always the ones preaching loyalty, who forget who they come from. Shaq stared at the screen, thumb hovering. He didn't reply, didn't clap back. Instead, he powered the phone off and sat at the edge of his booth, the restaurant empty but for the hum of the walk-in cooler. He had been betrayed before by corporations, agents, fair-weather friends. But this cut different. This was betrayal by silence, by the people who didn't speak up, by the ones he'd sponsored, mentored, given second and third chances to. The ones who called him Big Bro on the good days, and ghosted him when the rumors dropped. He thought about the high schooler whose tuition he paid last fall, hadn't heard from her since. The church group he fed for Easter, not a word. Even Lenora, who'd shared her story with him just days ago, hadn't texted back since the story broke. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the Soulfry logo stitched on his apron. This business wasn't a vanity project. It was his offering, the place he built, not to get rich, but to give richness back. He'd filled this building with love, grace, second chances, and now, it was being flipped upside down by a whisper campaign from a man who hadn't shown his face yet. Quentin Red was orchestrating a slow burn, not just draining accounts, but turning hearts. And Shaq knew why. Because money could be replaced. But trust, that was the real currency. And once you lost that, every apology came back stamped insufficient. He sat in the dark for a long while, not moving, just letting the ache settle in. Tomorrow he'd show up again. Not louder, just sharper. He didn't need to fight to be heard. He needed to show the truth. One careful piece at a time. The tide had shifted, but Big Shaq was still standing. It was a slow Thursday afternoon at Shaq's Soul Fry. The kind of quiet stretch between lunch and dinner, where the oil settles, the music softens, and the world exhales. Shaq sat in his usual booth near the window. His large frame leaned back against the wall, half watching the street, and half doodling on the napkin, under his tea. His phone was off. His trust was fraying. The restaurant wasn't just his business anymore. It had become a battlefield, and so far he wasn't winning. Then she walked in. Late 60s, gray hair pinned into a tidy twist, trench coat that had seen a few decades, and shoes polished to an almost militant shine. Her stride was deliberate, posture upright, eyes scanning the restaurant like she wasn't here to eat. She was here to inspect. She moved straight toward Shaq's booth without asking. Without hesitating, she slid into the seat across from him and dropped a folded napkin in front of his plate. You're not paranoid, she said. Shaq stared at her, one eyebrow rising slowly. Excuse me? She tapped the napkin. They're laundering money through your name. Through this place. Not just this one, either. I've tracked 3 others in your chain. All of them manipulated. He didn't touch the napkin right away. He studied her first. And you are Glory Hensley, she replied crisply. Used to work forensic auditing for the IRS. Retired, but not bored. I run financial recon for small-town fraud victims now. You came up on my radar when a bakery I consult for was hit with a forged order under a shell company linked to Lucille Holdings. Shaq's body froze for half a second. She noticed. You know that name, she said. He nodded slowly. It's my mother's, or at least it used to be. Glory leaned in, voice even. They're using emotional cover, personal names, legacy symbols. They've done this before, just not on someone this visible. That's why I came in person. Shaq opened the napkin, written in clean block lettering, Delaware, Nevada, Grand Cayman. Red. Below that were 3 routing numbers, and an LLC registry that matched what he'd already seen. You're thorough, he said. I'm obsessed with details, she replied. Especially the kind that cost people their lives, or at least their dignity. Shaq folded the napkin carefully. tucking it into his back pocket. He wasn't quick to trust anymore. But there was something surgical in her demeanor. Something that didn't beg to be believed. It just was. "How long you been watching this?" he asked. "Since the whisper." Shaq blinked. "What whisper?" Glory's mouth tightened. "A few weeks ago I was in your store. Not this one. The branch near Savannah. I was eating hush puppies by the window when I overheard two men in delivery gear talking near the back cooler. One of them said, and I quote, 'He doesn't even know he's the shell.'" Shaq sat forward. That was nearly word for word what he'd heard in Peachtree. "I followed the paper trail," she continued. "Red's old tactics are all over it. Ghost Corps, backdated invoices, third-party consulting agencies that don't exist. They're not stealing from your accounts directly. They're using your legitimacy to clean dirty money. High-profile cover, public trust. You're the storefront, the face that makes it all look legal." Shaq clenched his fists under the table. Not in anger, in clarity. It was always Red's style. Let someone else take the fall. Use big, safe targets. Hide behind their good names while he played puppet master in the dark. "Why me?" he muttered. Glory answered without flinching. "Because you built something honest. Because you built something honest. Because you were visible but unassuming. Because no one questions Shaquille O'Neal handing out wings to kids. He made you a safe smokescreen." Shaq exhaled hard, then leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. "So what now? We gather. We prepare. We set the bait," she said simply. Shaq narrowed his eyes. "You in this for the fight?" She smiled, a small wry curve of her lips. "I don't put on shoes like this for lunch." That night, they stayed in the office past closing. Shaq handed her every file he'd collected, every invoice, every hard drive backup. Glory moved fast, laser-focused. She created a new wall chart, dates, amounts, fake company names. She printed out photo stills of Delroy's hesitation, Kellen's delivery sign-ins, and Trey's front counter access logs. She pointed out gaps even Shaq hadn't caught. "They stagger activity," she said, tapping the timeline. "So no single person looks responsible. That's not rookie work." They found a line item that stopped both of them cold. Lucille Holdings to SRB Trust Co. $146,000. Consulting and marketing. Glory tapped the initials. "SRB," she said. "It's likely a holding company tied to Red's old real estate stunt back in Florida. I'll confirm. But this is the tip of something much bigger." Shaq nodded, his voice low. "He's building something under my name." "No," Glory corrected. "He's building something with your name as the scaffolding." Shaq looked down at the map of his own stores, now dotted with question marks and arrows, and something sank deep in his chest. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about control. They were turning his legacy, his mama's name, into an empire of fraud. And every smiling customer, every free meal, every community drive, just more cover for the scam. "I can't go public yet," he muttered. "Not without evidence that sticks. If I swing too early, I look like the crazy rich man crying conspiracy." Glory nodded. "Exactly. So we lay the net, silent, tight. We build a clean digital trap and let them walk into it." She pulled out a tablet and tapped open an encrypted program. "We'll ghost monitor every bank signal, every order request, every shift login. I've got contacts in federal audit who owe me favors. Quiet ones." Shaq looked at her with something approaching awe. "You ever thought about running the FBI?" "I got more sense," she quipped, then softened. "I do this because I remember what it feels like to watch your reputation bleed out in someone else's hands." He nodded, then stared at the photo of his mother pinned on the wall, her arms wrapped around him the night of his first championship. She was smiling, proud, unaware of the kind of legacy someone would try to weaponize one day. "They wanted me to feel cornered," he said. Glory nodded. "But you ain't. You're just waking up." That night, as they finished mapping the final wire trails, Shaq whispered something he hadn't said in days. "Thank you." Glory didn't look up. "Don't thank me yet. Just stay sharp. They think they're walking through a friendly kitchen." She tapped the screen. "They're walking into a forensic furnace. The dots had been there all along. Quiet, scattered, buried under spreadsheets and phony smiles. But now the pattern was undeniable. Glory's monitor glowed in the dark like a confession booth. One file opened to reveal wire routes, looping across continents. Another pinged timestamps, logins, and shadow authorizations traced back to burner accounts. At the center of it all sat one name, resurfaced from a decade-long grave: Quentin Red. Shaq stood behind her, arms folded, the muscles in his jaw twitching as he stared down at the screen. Glory didn't have to say it. He already knew. It was never Trey or Delroy, or Kellen. They were pieces on the board. The real player had never set foot inside Soulfry, never touched a fry basket or lifted a crate. He played from a distance, through proxies and code, using every inch of Shaq's reputation to build a facade too wholesome to question. "You recognize this signature?" Glory asked, pointing to a digital authorization stamped on a lease document for a fake supplier, supposedly signed by Shaq himself. "Yeah," Shaq muttered. "That's my old e-sign key from back in '09. Quentin set it up for endorsement contracts. Thought I canceled it." "He kept a copy," she said flatly. "Which means he's had a backdoor into your business for years." Glory clicked over to a scanned PDF of an internal memo from one of Shaq's regional offices. A scanned check request for equipment repairs from a company called Lucille Holdings. In the memo section it read, "Approved by Q, Red, via strategic affiliate channel." Shaq shook his head slowly, like trying to loosen the weight, pressing on him. "He used my mama's name like camouflage." Glory tapped the side of the monitor, her voice low but edged, "Because he knew it would freeze you. He used love as cover. Same reason he waited this long, until your brand grew big enough to shield his operation, and your trust in people made you easy to exploit." Shaq stepped back, mind flashing through a decade of interactions. He remembered Quentin's smooth suits, his quick-talking charm, the way he framed risk as growth. "You play humble, I'll play shark," Quentin had said once, grinning. "You keep smiling, and I'll handle the dirt." Shaq thought he'd left him behind, buried with the scandals and contracts. But Quentin didn't vanish. He went underground, learned new tricks, hacked trust like code. "What's he doing now?" Shaq asked. Glory pulled up a map interface. "If I had to guess, he's prepping the final sweep. In the next 7 to 10 days, the last set of shellcore will liquidate. Once that happens, the money gets bounced offshore, routed through crypto platforms, and disappears into holding accounts. You'll look like you authorized every move. Lucille Holdings is already listed as a core vendor in 3 of your franchises." Shaq exhaled hard. "How much?" "North of $1 million. That's what we can trace. Could be more." He turned away, pacing the floor of his office. His own name, twisted into a ghost brand. His mother's name, printed on invoices like a forgery of the soul. The boys, Trey, Kellen, Delroy, they'd never seen the top of the ladder. They were handed tasks, paid under the table, told just enough to stay useful and ignorant. "How do we stop it?" he asked. "We build a trap," Glory said. "We create a fake investment opportunity, leak it through one of the accounts we've isolated as compromised. Make it irresistible. Red's too arrogant to ignore fast cash. Once he tries to reroute it, we track the transfer, freeze the accounts and flag it through federal fraud protocols." "And the crew?" Shaq asked. "The ones working under him." Glory paused. "You want revenge or clarity?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He looked down at the photos she'd printed. Delroy holding a box of stolen oil, eyes downcast. Kellen scribbling signatures. Trey laughing beside the fryer. "I want to know who did it, because they had no choice. And who did it because they didn't care," he said finally. Glory nodded. "Then we'll give them a choice." The next day, Shaq called an all-staff meeting. No accusations. No finger-pointing. Just calm, even words. He announced a surprise audit of all franchise operations. Said it was routine. Said any irregularities would be reviewed independently. Trey shifted in his seat. Kellen looked at the floor. Delroy clenched his jaw. None of them spoke. That night, a security alert hit Glory's inbox. Someone tried to access the dummy account they'd created. The bait. The user ID, QRDID23. The location, Miami. "Bingo," she whispered. It escalated quickly after that. They traced the transaction path, isolated the crypto wallet, and backtracked its funding to a holding company in Panama. The digital trail was shaky, but Glory knew how to make it stick. She prepared a sealed report and sent it to a quiet contact in the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. Shaq stayed silent through it all. Watching, learning. The pain had become something else. A drive. Quentin hadn't just tried to rob him. He'd tried to rewrite him. Turn Big Shaq into a fraud front. But Shaq had built his house on more than deep fryers and feel-good quotes. He built it on presence, on truth, on people who could see through the steam. 2 days later, Delroy came into the office, eyes tired, lips tight. He didn't speak at first, just stood there holding a small envelope. I didn't know what it was, he said. At first, they told me it was just back-end logistics. I figured I'd just keep my head down. Shaq didn't interrupt. But then I heard you talking to that woman. And I knew. I just didn't want it to be real. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were printed emails, notes, account transfers, a trail. Shaq nodded, eyes level. You still got a choice. But it's gotta be yours. Delroy left without saying another word. But something had shifted. A crack in the silence. Later that night, Glory looked at Shaq across the conference table. You ever wonder why Red picked now? Shaq stared out the window at the neon glow of the Soul Fry sign. Because he thought I was too comfortable to fight. He looked back, voice clear. But comfort don't mean weakness. It means I got more to protect.
They were close now.
And Quentin Red had just stepped into his own trap. Shaq stood behind the counter of his Peachtree location. Apron crisp, voice easy, smile broad. He looked every bit the host, the hometown giant slinging honey-glazed chicken and soul rolls like he had no care in the world. But behind that easy grin, every cell in his body buzzed with tension. Glory's plan had taken 10 sleepless days to build. A sting, disguised as an investor pitch, folded into the soft rhythm of the restaurant's usual charm. They'd invited a potential silent partner to discuss franchising opportunities. Someone with old money, real estate connections, and a supposed interest in minority-owned chains. That partner, an FBI plant, posing as a bakery distributor from Tallahassee with just enough swagger to make it believable. He went by Hendrix, wore white loafers and always asked for sweet tea before anything else. Glory said he reminded her of an ex-husband, which meant he was perfect for bait. Inside the back office, 3 small cameras were hidden in a wall vent, behind a certificate, and inside a tipped printer. Microphones lined the ceiling tile, routed to a secured laptop. Glory monitored live from the break room. To the rest of the staff and to the Mark himself, it was just another Friday afternoon. Until Quentin Red walked in. He didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He strolled in, like he owned the air, dressed in navy slacks, an expensive shirt unbuttoned just enough, and sunglasses still on indoors. His confidence wasn't loud, but it filled the room like smoke. Shaq turned from the counter as if surprised. Well, I'll be damned, he said with a grin, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Quentin Red. Ain't seen that name in over a decade. Quentin smiled like a man who had already won. Thought I'd come see what you've built, he said smoothly, arms out like they were old friends. Shaq's Soul Fry, a southern empire. Shaq nodded, playing it slow, like the pieces hadn't already been arranged. You know me, always chasing the spice. Quentin laughed. No, you were always chasing legacy. Look at this place. He turned, gesturing to the customers, the framed photos, the laughter spilling from booths. It's beautiful, man. You built a heart out of hot oil. Shaq motioned toward the back office. Come on. Got a few folks wanting to hear your pitch. Maybe we grow this heart a little wider. Quentin followed, casual as ever. He passed Delroy in the hallway, and didn't flinch. Delroy looked away. He wasn't part of the sting, but he knew what was coming. Redemption doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence and a quiet nod. Inside the office, Hendrix sat with a portfolio open and a bottle of water in front of him. He looked up and offered Quentin a smile full of teeth. You the man with the plan, Hendrix said, voice syrup thick. I hear you've been running back end like a magician. Quentin sat across from him. Call it structural creativity. Shaq sat beside Hendrix, feigning confusion. So, walk me through it again. How does your model help our expansion? Quentin leaned forward, eyes shining. Simple. You leverage regional LLCs. Each one owns a piece of your supply chain, not the storefronts themselves. That way, if one gets flagged, the rest stay clean. Your name covers the front, but the revenue stream diversifies behind legal curtains. Shaq whistled. That sounds complicated. Quentin chuckled. That's the point. Complicated keeps you safe. You've already been running half of it, even if you didn't know. Glory, listening in from the break room, pressed record on 3 channels simultaneously. Her eyes never left the screen. You mean, Shaq said slowly. Lucille Holding? Quentin grinned. Now you're speaking my language. He leaned back, arms out, confidence thick. You built me an empire and smiled through it. I just did the organizing. Hendricks stood up slowly, stretching. Well, damn. I think that's about all we need. Quentin looked at him confused. You got questions? Just one, Hendricks said. He reached into his jacket. The back door burst open. 4 agents moved fast. Voices low but firm. Quentin read, You're under arrest for federal wire fraud, racketeering and identity misuse. Quentin stood up, hands instinctively half raised. Whoa, what is this? You don't know who I am. We do now, Glory said, stepping into the room with a flash drive in her hand, and calm in her voice. And so does the Department of Justice. Quentin's face hardened. His eyes shifted to Shaq, searching for some crack, some betrayal. You set me up. Shaq didn't flinch. No. You set yourself up when you thought I was still the rookie you walked over in '08. Outside the office, the restaurant had gone quiet. The regulars didn't know the details, but they saw the badges, the suits, the click of handcuffs. They saw Shaq standing tall, not in anger, but in relief. As the agents led Quentin out the front door, a woman at the corner booth clapped once, slow and steady. Then another. A wave of quiet applause rippled through the crowd. Not loud, not chaotic, just respectful. Shaq stepped back into the dining room, the air still holding tension. Carla handed him a cold towel, her eyes proud but soft. You okay? She asked. He wiped his face, nodded once. Not sure yet. He walked behind the counter, looked around at his people, Lenora watching from the doorway, Delroy wiping down a table in silence. Even Trey sitting with his head down. They weren't perfect, but they were his, and now they could rebuild, with truth. Glory joined him near the soda machine, sipping unsweet tea like it was victory champagne. Game's over, she said. Shaq looked out across the restaurant. Customers returning to their meals, kids laughing again, the deep fryer sizzling in rhythm. His heart pounded, not in triumph, but in disbelief that it had all happened here, in his house, in the name of his mama, in the shadow of his own good intentions. He wasn't celebrating yet, but for the first time in weeks, he could breathe. Weeks passed, and the storm gave way to blue skies. Not all at once, not in some dramatic cinematic sweep, but little by little, like the light returns after a long southern rain, creeping through cracks in the clouds, warming the roof one shingle at a time. Shaq sat on the edge of the booth that had become his second office. He didn't look like a millionaire today. He looked like a man who'd been through something. Flour dusted across his apron, a grease smudge on his wrist, hands rougher than they'd been in years. Behind him, the kitchen sizzled like it used to, full of noise and clatter and real folks working with purpose. The headlines had faded from scandal to redemption. Shaquille O'Neal thwarts fraud ring with local whistleblower. The giant who listened, community rebuilds with Shaq at the center. But Shaq didn't care about articles. He didn't care about cameras. He cared about who came back.
Lenora did.
Not just as a cleaner, but now as a manager, running 2 Soulfry locations with a clipboard in one hand, and her son's drawings hanging on the break room wall. Delroy did. Quiet, steady, still not much for conversation, but he clocked in early and left late, never asked for a raise, just kept showing up. Shaq noticed, respect didn't need fireworks, it just needed consistency. Trey and Kellen didn't come back. Their silence spoke for them. Shaq didn't chase them. Forgiveness was available, but not forced. He'd learned the difference between grace and naivety. And Glory Hensley? She'd moved into a small upstairs office above the Peachtree location. The plaque on her door read, Forensic Consulting, private appointments only, but everyone just called her the lady with the laptop. She became the quiet firewall between Shaq's kindness and the world's schemes. Shaq's narration these days didn't come with bravado. It came low, thoughtful, like a man still learning from his bruises. I almost lost everything because I trusted people, he said once, wiping his hands on a towel. But I'd rather be a man who trusts too much than one who loves too little. He didn't rebuild fast. He rebuilt right. He called every vendor personally, sat with the franchise leads over meals, not conference calls. He had meetings with lawyers and accountants, sure, but also with pastors, teachers, and the young boys who swept his parking lot after school. The community hadn't just watched his fall, they'd watched his fight to rise without bitterness. And that mattered. Because when someone who could have been unreachable, a millionaire, a mogul, a brand, chooses to stay present, even when it hurts, folks remember that. One morning, the Peachtree store held a clean start brunch. No press, just locals. The kids from the nearby rec center performed a step routine in front of the building. Parents lined up for plates of chicken and cornbread. The air smelled like smoked garlic and cinnamon tea, and the music was Marvin Gaye's slow jamming through the speakers. Shaq was back in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, wiping sweat from his brow as he prepped his signature honey glaze. Someone snapped a photo of him, big man, bent over a sauce pot, grinning as the steam hit his face. The caption that went viral read, "You can't fake care like this." He never shared it, never commented, but he saw it, and it stayed with him. Later that afternoon, as the rush thinned and the team prepped for the next wave, a young boy wandered into the store, no older than 7, torn sneakers, hands in his pockets. He stared at the menu with the kind of focus only hunger gives. Shaq stepped from behind the counter, towel slung over his shoulder.
"You hungry, champ?"
He asked. The boy nodded, eyes wide but cautious. "I don't got money though." Shaq crouched, knees cracking like they always did. "Sometimes," he said, "the best meals come free." He handed the boy a tray, chicken sandwich, mac and cheese, lemonade, and a cookie bigger than his hand. "On the house," Shaq said, smiling. The boy looked up, hesitant. "Why?" Shaq tapped his chest. "'Cause someone fed me once when I didn't have nothing." He leaned closer, lowered his voice just a notch. "But promise me this. Stay honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The boy nodded like it meant something. Like he understood it wasn't just about food. It was about work. Shaq watched him walk to a booth and dig in. He stood there for a beat longer, something heavy and warm settling in his chest. Not pride, not relief. Peace. The kind you earn one plate, one truth, one repaired relationship at a time. Later that evening, as the crew closed down and the last fryer hissed quiet, Glory walked in with her tablet, glasses low on her nose. "You know," she said, setting the device on the counter, "I had a case once. Guy lost everything, vanished from the map. You didn't vanish." Shaq wiped his hands, glanced at the dark windows. "I thought about it," he admitted. "But this place ain't just mine. It's stitched into too many lives." Glory nodded, her smile small but sincere. "Then keep frying." Shaq chuckled. "You ever gonna try the catfish?" "Not until you label the allergens properly," she shot back. He laughed louder this time. As the lights dimmed and the soul fry sign glowed soft outside, Shaq stood at the door, locking up with a final glance at the dining room. Empty now, but full in every way that mattered. The name on the wall meant more than ever. Not just because he'd saved it, but because he'd reclaimed it. And as long as people needed food, fairness, and a place to feel seen, his soul would keep frying quiet, steady, faithful. Just like he'd always promised. If this story lit a spark, stay close. We've got more where truth meets tension, and heart meets hustle. Real stakes, real voices, real redemption. Because sometimes the biggest stories don't come from the headlines. They come from the kitchen. Keep your ears open. The next one's already cooking.